You don't say much, and that's okay, because sometimes silence carries more truth than all the words in the world. You sit there, composed, still. Your eyes aren't searching. Your voice isn't reaching. You don't chase conversations or fill empty space with noise. But I want you to know something. I see you, even when you say nothing. Not everyone can. Most people mistake your quiet for absence. They think you're disinterested, distant. Some even call you cold. But that's not the truth, is it? You've simply learned that not every space deserves your voice. Not every person earns your story. Not every question needs an answer. And so, you hold your words like they matter, because to you, they do. You watch more than you speak. You listen longer than others stay. And while the world rushes to be heard, you've become fluent in the language of restraint. There's a strength in that, a kind of stillness that isn't passive, but anchored, like a mountain in the middle of a storm, like the eye of a hurricane, calm not because there's no chaos, but because you've made peace with it. You carry a quiet energy that others don't understand, and sometimes that misunderstanding gets lonely. I know, because being different, especially as a man who doesn't need to prove anything, can feel like walking alone in a room full of noise. But let me tell you something honest. That presence you carry, it says more than any speech could. It says, I know who I am, I don't need to explain it. And whether they admit it or not, people notice, especially her. Not because you tried to be noticed, but because you didn't. So no, you're not invisible. You're just rare. And in a world that's forgotten how to sit with silence, you are a reminder of something ancient, something lost, something real. They say you're a loner, that you prefer distance, that you detach easily. But they never ask why, do they? They never wonder what it costs to walk a path where few follow. They don't see the miles in your silence. They don't hear the echoes in your independence. But I do. Because solitude isn't always a sign of isolation. Sometimes it's the highest form of honesty. And when you step away from the noise, you're not disappearing. You're preserving. You're not lost. You're listening not to them but to yourself. And that takes more courage than most will ever know. There's a kind of man who doesn't need constant contact, who doesn't fear being misunderstood, because he stopped living for explanation, who would rather feel whole alone than half alive in shallow company. That's you. And still, I know it's not always easy, because the world celebrates those who belong, who merge, who blend. But you were never made to follow the blueprint. You were made to design your own. And while others rely on the noise to feel alive, you find life in the pause, in the unspoken, in the space between who you are and who they expect you to be. Sometimes that space feels wide, and even though you're strong, even though you're used to carrying your own weight, it's okay to admit that carrying it alone gets heavy. But let me remind you of something. You walk alone, not because no one wants to walk with you, but because few know how. You're not drifting, you're choosing. Not everyone can meet you where you are, but one day, someone will recognize your rhythm. They won't try to keep up. They'll just walk beside you quietly, completely. Until then, don't shrink your stride. You're not lost. You're just ahead of your time. They call you mysterious, intriguing, hard to read. They romanticize the silence, the way you disappear without notice, the way your words come slow, measured, like you're choosing which parts of yourself are safe to reveal. But mystery, that wasn't the goal, was it? It was the result. The result of years spent opening doors only to be met with noise, people who didn't listen, people who asked questions but didn't wait for the answers. So now, you stay quiet, not to provoke curiosity, but to protect peace. And yes, they're drawn to that, to your restraint, to the way you sit with yourself like you're not trying to escape, to the calm that wraps around you like armor. But they don't see the weight behind it. They don't know how many times you let someone in only to watch them misuse the access. How many times you gave a real piece of you and got fragments in return. So you stopped offering, not out of bitterness, out of wisdom. You learned that not everyone deserves front row seats to your soul, and that sometimes the deepest form of love is protecting your inner world from being mishandled. Now they call it mystery, but you know it's more like survival. Because when your heart has lived through loud betrayals, silence becomes sanctuary. Still, I want you to know, not everyone sees your quiet as a riddle. Some of us see it as history, as healing, as the language of someone who's been through fire and still stands. And while they may try to decode you, he won't. I won't ask for more than you want to give, because even if you never say a word, your presence speaks with a clarity few have the ears to hear. You don't need to be understood by everyone. You just need to be safe enough to stop surviving long enough to simply be. There's something powerful about the way you hold your words. You don't interrupt. You don't speak just to fill space. You don't rush to be heard. Instead, you wait. You let the silence settle. You let others exhaust their thoughts. And when you finally speak, it's like everything else goes quiet. Not because you're loud, but because your voice doesn't arrive until it has something real to say. And maybe that's what sets you apart. You speak from stillness, not performance. From depth, not noise. You don't argue to win. You speak to connect, to clarify, to protect something sacred. And when you say something, it lingers. Not in volume, but in weight. It stays with people, in the back of their minds, long after the room has emptied, long after the applause has faded. You may not say much, but you don't need to, because your words feel like they've traveled a long way to get here. They carry experience, conviction, presence, and that is rare. In a world addicted to instant responses, to constant access, to saying everything at once, you remind us of the value of pause, of listening, of waiting for meaning to arrive instead of forcing it. And when you do speak, people lean in, not out of obligation, but because they sense something alive in what you say. Something that wasn't said just to be heard, but to be remembered. So don't let the world convince you to talk more. Don't let the pressure to be more engaging pull you from your truth. Because when your voice rises from silence, it carries the power of 1,000 empty sentences, unsaid. People look at you and say, "He's so calm," like it's just your nature, like stillness came easily to you. But they don't know what you've walked through to earn that stillness. They don't see the storms you've endured, the losses that reshaped your breath, the betrayals that taught you where not to place your trust, the pressure that once built so loud in your chest, you thought it might break you. They think you were born like this, but I know better. You didn't choose peace because the world offered it freely. You chose it because chaos once sat too long in your mind, and you got tired of fighting things that never gave back. So now, you respond slower. You pose more. You don't rise to every bait. Don't attend every argument you're invited to. That's not detachment. That's mastery. That's you deciding which battles are worth the bruises. And yes, it unnerves some people. The way you don't react, the way your eyes don't flinch, the way you can hold your center, even when the ground shakes. But that calmness, it's not distance. It's discipline. It's you learning, over and over again, that you don't need to match the chaos around you to prove you're strong. You've already proved it by surviving, by softening instead of snapping, by still believing in something better, even after seeing the worst. And if no one ever tells you this, let me be the one. I see that strength, and it's not quiet because it's small. It's quiet because it's sacred. The kind of strength that doesn't parade, it protects. And in your calm, there's a whole history the world may never read, but I promise it's written in your presence. It's strange, isn't it? You don't try to be noticed. You don't perform. You don't chase. And yet, somehow, they still look, still lean in, still wonder. You don't flirt with a glance. You don't broadcast your life for approval. You simply exist on your own terms. And that, somehow, makes your presence louder than noise. You see, in a world built on attention, likes, followers, instant replies, you are a disruption. A man who doesn't need to be seen to know he matters. And that confuses people, especially her, because she's used to being pursued, to seeing desire spelled out in excess. But you don't offer excess, you offer essence. When you speak, it's not to impress. When you show up, it's not to please. And when you connect, it's not to possess, but to understand. That's what pulls her in. Not your silence, but what that silence says about your self-worth. You don't give your energy away easily. You don't hand out access just because someone is curious. You're selective not out of pride, but out of clarity. And though some call it cold, it's actually the warmest form of respect. Not pretending to feel what you don't, not performing connection for the sake of comfort. You know that your attention is sacred, and you won't let just anyone hold it, because you've learned what it costs to let the wrong people too close. And yet, when you do give it, when you choose to stay, to listen, to care, it means something, because it's rare, and anything rare becomes unforgettable. So let them wonder, let them lean in, let them feel that quiet gravity. You're not being mysterious, you're being intentional, and the difference is everything. You don't ask for permission to be who you are. You never did. Even when the world tried to hand you a script, how to dress, how to speak, how to fit, you paused, looked it over, and quietly set it down. You chose something else, your own compass, your own voice, your own rhythm, and while others shape themselves to be accepted, you remain unchanged. Not out of rebellion, not out of arrogance, but because approval never felt like freedom to you. You've watched men chase applause, bend their truth to fit someone else's expectations, trade their peace for popularity. And you knew that kind of validation always comes with a leash. So you chose differently. You chose to stand alone, if that's what it took to stay aligned. And yes, that unsettles people. Because when a man no longer needs to be liked, he becomes unpredictable, uncontainable, unapologetically whole. And that is terrifying to those who've never lived beyond the mirror of someone else's opinion. But don't let that shake you. Their discomfort isn't your burden. Your strength doesn't need to be shrunk to keep others calm. Because here's what they won't admit. Deep down, they envy you. Not because you're perfect, but because you're free. Free from chasing approval you'll never keep. Free from living for an audience. Free from the fear of being misunderstood. And even when they roll their eyes, call you distant, call you too much or too little, they know. They know there's something different in your silence. Something unowned, something powerful. So keep choosing freedom, even when it costs you comfort, even when it sets you apart. Because what you lose in applause, you gain in sovereignty, and no one can take that from you. You don't pretend. You never learned how, or maybe you just chose not to. While others bend themselves into shapes just to be liked, you stay rooted, not loud, not defiant, just real. And that is rare. Because let's be honest, authenticity isn't easy. It doesn't always win applause. It doesn't make you the favorite in every room. Sometimes it means disappointing people. Sometimes it means being alone with your truth, while the world gathers around a lie. But you do it anyway. Not because it's glamorous, but because it's the only way you know how to breathe. You don't wear masks, not at work, not in love, not in friendship, because you've lived enough to know that pretending your way into acceptance is the loneliest form of abandonment. And she notices, not always right away, but slowly in the way you answer questions with honesty, even when it would be easier to charm, in the way you don't flatter for favors, don't overpromise, don't play the role. She sees it in your eyes. You're not trying to be good. You're trying to be whole. And that difference, it's magnetic. Because in a sea of polished profiles and polished smiles, you feel like something real. Not curated, not strategic, just you. Unfiltered, unapologetics, unmoved by trends, yet somehow always timeless. People may not always agree with you. They may not always understand, but they remember you. Because authenticity leaves a trace that can't be erased by distance or time. So keep showing up as you are, even when it's not easy, even when it's misunderstood, even when it would be safer to soften your truth. Because being real in a world of copies isn't just brave, it's revolutionary. And you, in all your unpolished glory, are a quiet revolution walking. You never needed to be the center of attention. You never chased spotlights. You didn't crave applause or the rush of being noticed. But somehow, when you walk away, the room still feels your absence. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's there, like the space a heavy book leaves when it's removed from a shelf. The air shifts. Something is missing, and even if no one can name it, they feel it. Because you don't just pass through life, you leave something behind. A pause, a presence, a question. You don't try to be unforgettable, you simply are. Because what you bring into a space isn't decoration, it's substance. And in a world so easily impressed by flash, your stillness feels like depth, your silence feels like gravity, your presence feels like a mirror. Not everyone can handle that. Some will be drawn to you and not know why. Others will feel exposed, uncomfortable in your calm. But that's not your burden, it's your truth. You were never meant to blend in. You were meant to reflect, to remind, to recalibrate. So if you ever wonder if anyone sees you, if your presence matters, if your silence still speaks, let this be your answer. Yes, it matters more than you know. Because even long after your voice has faded from the room, long after your footsteps are gone, what you left behind lingers. Not noise, not performance, but impact. You are the man who leaves an echo, not because you tried, but because you were fully, quietly, undeniably, you. And in a world desperate for something real, that is everything.